My name is Dustin. This is Dusty Ohio Video Productions. Today we're going to be talking about M. Night Shyamalan's new film, Trap. Roll the intro. I would like to mention a brief disclaimer before I get into the plot description of this film. While I won't be mentioning anything that doesn't happen in the trailer, I think the trailer kind of gives away a lot of what happens in this film, and if you want to go in fresh, you should probably be aware of that fact. So, that being said, let's get into it. As already previously mentioned, Trap is the new film from writer-director M. Night Shyamalan.
M. Night Shyamalan, ding dong.
The plot follows a man named Cooper who's played by Josh Hartnett. He takes his daughter Riley, played by Ariel Donahue, to a concert of the pop star known as Lady Raven. Lady Raven is played by the real-life pop star Salika. While at the concert, Cooper realizes that it is an elaborate trap set by the police in order to catch a serial killer known as the Butcher. Now, guess who the Butcher is? The rest of the film's runtime sees Cooper engaging in more elaborate lies and schemes to escape this arena, while also trying not to alert his daughter Riley to anything suspicious with his behavior. Before I start to talk about Trap, I'd like to briefly explain my opinions on M. Night Shyamalan as a director. Before Split came out, and Split did kind of change it thankfully, but before Split came out, he was regarded as basically a terrible director. He had completely sullied his reputation with films like The Happening and The Last Airbender, and the early success with his film The Sixth Sense, or Signs, or Unbreakable, was basically viewed as a fluke because of these later films. I think labeling him as a bad director was a total mischaracterization. And after Split came out, he did sort of prove that and redeem his reputation a little bit, but there's still a lot of people out there that claim he's a bad director, and I personally don't agree with that. Well, I don't think he's one of the best directors of all time, and that he certainly has bad films, again, The Happening and The Last Airbender. I do like those early films quite a bit, I like Split quite a bit, and I actually did like Glass. Glass had a lot of mixed opinions on it, but while I thought the narrative had some issues, I thought overall it was an enjoyable film, and it basically succeeded in what it wanted to do. And every director has bad films. Francis Ford Coppola is known as one of the greatest directors of all time, and he directed The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2. He directed Part 3 as well, but that one's a mixed bag. And he directed Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now and the first two Godfathers are known as some of the best films of all time. And then he made Jack in the 1990s. And Jack is not regarded as one of the best films of all time. But we don't write off all of Francis Ford Coppola's career because of Jack. I feel similarly about Shyamalan. While he does have those bad films, I don't think we should write off his entire career because of them. Because almost all the directors have bad films. There's very few that don't. So with that little side tangent out of the way, does Trap fall into the good side with Split and those films, or does it fall into the bad side with The Last Airbender and The Happening? And I'm sure some of his other work, I haven't seen everything. It's sort of in the middle. There's a lot of things that Trap does very, very well. The acting, especially from Josh Hartnett as Cooper, is great. He's able to embody this Family Guy, nice guy facade, and then at the drop of a hat, he's able to switch into this cold, calculating serial killer known as the Butcher. And that dynamic on screen is quite entertaining to watch. He's great. His daughter Riley, played by Ariel Donahue, is also fantastic. She is very idealized as a daughter. She's basically what every father would dream of having in a daughter. She worships the ground her father walks on. And that gets a little obnoxious in an unrealistic sense, but the two actors have a palpable on-screen bond, and this allows you to be carried through moments that would typically have your eyes glazing over. Visually, the film is basically perfect. Every single shot composition, every pan, every item in frame is there for a reason and is meant to push the story forward. While it's advanced enough not to be bland or boring, it's not flashy in a sense where it's like, oh, look at me. It's just there, and that is something that Shyamalan has always done well. But what he and this cinematographer, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name, are able to achieve with this is a constant sense of tension, which leads me to what this film does best. The atmosphere and mood that's created in this film is something that I've never experienced before and is kind of difficult to describe, so bear with me a moment. Cooper is not a good person. So you simultaneously want him to get caught, but because Josh Hartnett is such a good actor, when he goes into that Family Guy facade, you don't want his daughter to see him crumble in front of her. So you're also rooting for him to escape at the same time you're rooting for him to get caught. This creates an interesting dynamic where you're being whipped back and forth, and this time it's actually intentional. It's not a tonal clash. You're meant to feel this way. On top of that, you go along with the character and trying to figure out different ways to escape. You're trying to figure out what his plan is, and it becomes almost like a puzzle game. It's very, very fun. And that atmosphere is something I've never experienced in another film before. It's great. So those are all the positives. What are the negatives? Basically everything Shyamalan is infamous for. Bad dialogue, exposition, characters that act stilted, and sloppy execution of its plot elements. Scattered throughout the runtime are various plot points that make little to no sense. They just sort of happen to push the story forward and don't feel realistic or natural in the slightest. On top of that, you have dialogue that's either poor due to being overly expository, or it's poor just because it's not written well, and this leads to performances that are stilted and feel alien. This works for the character of Cooper because he's supposed to be a sociopathic or psychopathic serial killer. I'm not really sure which one. And they work for that character, especially when he's trying to escape and he's becoming more and more panicked. However, they don't work for the more pedestrian characters that you're supposed to relate to, at least on some level. To summarize the problems with this movie, the script is just a mess. I don't think that ruins the overall experience, though. It has a lot of elements that are great. The best way I can describe Trap is to ask you to imagine a pot pie. Now this might sound weird, but I swear it has a point. Imagine a pot pie with the creamiest filling ever. The vegetables and the meat are seasoned to perfection. That would be the film's cinematography, atmosphere created in that arena, and the acting from the main characters. Now imagine the crust of that pot pie is burnt to a crisp and completely inedible. That is the script. Now what most people would do, and what I recommend the audience metaphorically does, is to eat that delicious filling and ignore the awful crust. I'm quite proud of myself for that comparison, I'm not gonna lie. Trap is very enjoyable if you can get into that mood like I did that is created in the arena. It has great shot composition, as I already stated, and the camera work generally is amazing. The acting from Josh Hartnett and Ariel Donahue is also fantastic. Those elements carried me through the rest of the film, which is kind of a lot of back and forth with weird things happening, and the script does go entirely off the rails towards the end, which I found unfortunate. But I can't minimize the effective filmmaking that happened before the script went off the rails and before all these issues started rearing their head. Overall, do I recommend Trap? Yes, I do. And partially that reasoning is selfish, because I want M. Night Shyamalan to continue making films. Aside from what I said earlier, with me thinking a lot of his films are quite good, I also think his bad films are bad in an interesting way, and quite frankly, M. Night never ceases to entertain me. Whether he makes a good or bad film, they're always interesting. I want to see him continue to get work, and for that very selfish reason, I recommend that you go see Trap.